Welcome everybody to Dr. Allott's Optimizing Brains Connectors group. Today we are especially lucky to have a guest speaker who is going to be talking to us about herbs. Dr. Kathyrn Cranford will talk to us about how to use herbs safely for treating anxiety. She's a naturopathic physician and started a naturopathic school finding commonality in the healing power of food and compassion. She is a skilled herbalist and founder of the annual Bastyr Herb Fair. Today she's going to be talking to us about a couple different herbs that are effective for treating anxiety that are safe to use with other medication. I just want to give a quick reminder that this webinar is being provided for educational and informational purposes only. So nothing in the discussion is intended to constitute medical advice, consultation, recommendation, diagnosis, or treatment.
Thank you, Natasha. Well, I went to school with Dr. Allott a lot of years ago, and it's a great honor to be able to step in for her while she is off enjoying time with her husband. So you guys are just waking up 7:30 out in Seattle. It's still it's already 10:30 here in New Hampshire. You also have spring probably well beyond what we have at this point. I did go out this morning to see if one of the herbs I'm going to talk about was coming up in the garden, but it's still hiding under the soil at this point, so not quite ready to pop out. But as Natasha said, I had a great interest in herbal medicine starting in my first year at Bastyr, because we were spending so much time in gross anatomy lab and pathology and histology and all of those things, and I wanted to spend more time out with the plants. And so two friends of mine and I started the Herbal Club, which turned into an annual gathering. I think there were 200 people at the first one, and they have to bus people in from a Hannaford's parking lot down the way nowadays because it's gotten so big. So it's really exciting that people are paying attention to plants and the great medicine that they offer. So I've thrown a few slides together, so I'm just going to flip over to that primarily. And so I am just going to dive right in with herbs for anxiety. And I titled it Where to Begin because there are a ton of plants that are really great for mental health, for anxiety, for depression, for all sorts of different things that are pretty common in our society right now. But there are a few that are so basic and safe and easy to use that it's a great place to start people who know nothing about plants yet. So that's where we're going. So I'm briefly just going to say hello to anxiety. This is something that I have seen more and more in my practice. And I don't know if it's the political climate, if it's the being at war for 20 years as a country, all of the things that are happening on the news. I see a lot of this, and people don't come in saying that they're upset about the news. They just are upset. Their lives are a little bit jangled right now for all kinds of reasons. So some people have anxiety that creates depression. Some people have depression that creates anxiety. Some people have just sort of an underlying all through the day uneasiness. Other people are doing fine, and then something will trigger them into a full-blown panic attack. And sometimes they can feel it coming and they can do something about it, and sometimes it just really grabs them and they have to work a long time to get out of that state. Sometimes insomnia is created by anxiety because you're nervous about something and you're thinking about it all night and you can't sleep. Sometimes you have insomnia and it wears down on your cortisol system in the daytime because you're trying to work on lack of sleep, and so that creates more anxiety and excessive worry about not being able to get to all of the tasks that you have. So generalized nervousness, fear, apprehension, all of those things. So whether it is a mild anxiety or something more substantial, the plants definitely have a place where they can offer into that. The conventional medical treatments tend to be just drug therapy for symptoms. Getting people to do EMDR, tapping, biofeedback, counseling, all of those things are great options. And I always encourage people, whether they're doing pharmaceutical therapy or herbal therapy, to engage those other things, because sometimes you can help the symptoms to settle down, but if you don't get at the core of the issue, then you're not really getting anywhere, and things are going to just happen over again, come back later. So the SSRIs, MAOIs are very common and are, as everybody knows, really widely prescribed at this point. But they do have, and then the benzodiazepines well. We have some people who are on those really long term, which is not what they are designed for. So getting people off of those is a real task, and we have to do very long titration processes where we can take the dose down a little bit and support them with herbs in order to get out from under some of those drugs that they've been on for too long. So the well-known side effects I have listed here of drowsiness, fatigue, confusion, disorientation, impaired memories, and if you are driving, operating machinery, just a lot of things that you can't do when you're on the benzodiazepines. And then the SSRIs also have other issues, including the gastrointestinal disturbances, agitation, insomnia, all of those things, lowered sex drive. So some of those things people are really not happy about. So if we can get them to be able to use herbs instead, that's great. So I threw this slide in because there's always questions when you start talking about herbs with populations that aren't familiar with herbs. They're very concerned about drug interactions and side effects. So I always say, first and foremost, always do think, always do be cautious, ask those questions, but also know that plants are the origin of most modern drugs. The word drug, D-R-O-G-G-E, was the original word for plant in Old English. So that's where we get the word drug. So they're very clearly related, and there are drugs that are, there are plants that are very strong and can create side effects, can interact with things. But the three plants I'm going to refer to today are generally recognized as safe by the FDA. They're very simple plants. They're not really intense in terms of their chemical makeup. So most of the time they're fine. I will mention that most herbs are not used in pregnancy or nursing without direction of a practitioner with extensive training on both herbal medicine and obstetrics and newborn care. So there are some wonderful books. Medication in Mother's Milk is one that really looks at what drugs and herbs can be used safely in nursing. There are a lot of lists of plants that say whether a plant can be used in the first, second, or third trimester. So again, that's just a kind of blanket statement that you don't want to start people on herbs unless you really know what you're doing when they're pregnant. So like I said, none of the three herbs we're going to talk about today have any problems with interactions, especially in the forms and dosages that we are considering. And I will mention the side effects to look out for, but they're also very rare. Nervine plants in general are some of the safest class of herb medicines. It's one of the reasons that I really like using them, because they kind of settle a lot of things without a lot of problems. And then tea, as a form of delivery, is also one of the safest ways to deliver it, and you can do, you know, multiple times during the day without coming up with too high a dose of anything. I'm going to dive right into the plants. So English lavender, Lavandula angustifolia. I love to say these Latin names. And the Latin names are important, even though they are quite a mouthful, because they determine which species of the plant you have. English lavender, lavender, German, there's French lavender. There's a lot of different lavenders, and they all do have some nervine action, but some will have stronger and some will have lesser. And there are some plants where the common names really overlap a lot. And so it's good to know by the Latin binomial what plant you really have. So lavender is, for the most part, a fragrance that's put into all kinds of candles and salves and hand lotions and all kinds of things, because a lot of people really find the fragrance to be pleasant, but I have run into a couple of people who really dislike it. And so you just go to a different plant. It's not a really big problem. I have a friend who has a farm out on an island in the Puget Sound, and her husband calls his lavender cutting therapy, the therapy that he does. He doesn't go to see a therapist. He takes a 5-gallon bucket out into the field, and he sits with a little bit of clipper and cuts 100 stalks of lavender per bundle, and he wraps those up in a little bundle, and then they hang them in the barn. And I thought that was lovely. And she said, no, you don't understand. And she brought me out to look at the barn, and there were literally hundreds, maybe thousands of these 100 stalk bundles hanging from the rafters, and it smelled incredible in there. So very substantial therapy for him. Part of the reason this is a great plant is because it's very easy to grow, it's easy to dry, it's easy to save. When you strip the flowers off of the stalks, you can put them into pillows, and those pillows will smell like lavender for years. They are, I have actually some that are hanging in little vases on the wall that I've had up there for maybe 15 years. And when I take them down, they still have that fragrance of lavender. And added to a tea in a small amount, it's pretty nice. It gives you that fragrance. It's a little bit of a bitter plant. It's an odd flavor. You know, it's something that everybody's really used to smelling, but not so much tasting. So I usually put it in a small amount to add so that you can get that fragrance. And I always steep teas covered so that those volatile oils that come up from the plant and come into your olfactory system are not lost out into the room. You can cover it until it's done steeping, and when you open that up, all the steam and the volatile oils are coming up into your breathing system. You can add small amounts of the dry herb or the oil to bath water. Essential oils, any essential oils topically should be diluted in a carrier oil, because if you put them directly on the skin, they can be pretty caustic. So you want to be careful about that. You can put a drop on a baby's bib around their neck. You don't want to probably put it on baby's skin because that can be a little bit irritating. But you put a bib on a baby that's got congestion, put a drop on at night, they'll sleep better, and it helps because it's antimicrobial as well. The eye pillow is a wonderful thing. You block out the light that is messing with your pineal gland and your cortisol secretions, and you're getting that darkness and that fragrance at the same time, and it really helps to turn off those racing thoughts at night. So having one of those by your bed is a great thing. And I put this down here. There was a winery in California that I went to visit with a naturopath friend of mine years ago, and they had lavender plants all around the grape fields, and they just harvested that, not to use with the wine, but it seemed like that smell was keeping pests out, and it was a beautiful border. And they sent me home with literally a pillow case full of lavender, and I brought that home on the plane, and that was actually too much lavender to be sleeping with. So this plant, I'm going to show you a little bit of tea making in a little bit here, but for the time being, I'm just going to mention any side effects. The German E Commission monographs on herbs list no contraindications, side effects, or drug interactions for lavender flower. Some other sources that I found do report that internal use of volatile oil, of any volatile oils, but lavender oil in particular, can cause nausea or drowsiness after excessive intake. So if you're using internal essential oils, those are very small, like drop doses, and I generally don't even recommend that. You can get a little bit of the oil through the tea, and that's plenty. And then I mentioned before about the bib on children, possible skin irritation to children with topical application without diluting it in some olive oil or an almond oil, something that they don't have an allergic reaction to. So that is lavender, the purple queen. I love that plant. Lemon balm is one of my favorites because it grows so easily. This is in the mint family. You can tell mints because they have a square stem. You can actually roll it in your fingers and feel the four sides of the stem. These leaves, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, are scalloped or toothed on the edges, and that scallop goes all the way around the leaf. The leaves themselves are pretty wrinkly. They smell very much like lemon. You can find them in the garden quite easily. And it grows prolifically and self-seeds across the garden. Once you plant it someplace, the next year it'll come up in a bunch of other places, and you can dig it up and move it to where you want it if you want. It's not really an invasive plant like most of the mint family can get kind of like that. But you can eat this straight out of the garden, fresh. You don't need to dry it or anything. You can dry it, but it is more potent if the tea is made directly from the fresh leaves, if you can get those. So if people live in a temperate climate, I often will give them a cutting, or I'll dig up a little bit of something that's jumped and say, here, take this home, put it in your garden and grow it and make tea. You can buy the tea bags or the loose tea. And I do cut it and dry it, and it's just a little less potent using the dried tea. So no side effects whatsoever from this plant. You can drink gallons of this in a day and you'll be fine. It tastes really good. I do have a wonderful story of a woman who called me with postpartum anxiety. She had 2 children at home, had just had a new baby. They were living in a one-room cabin with a wood stove and no electricity. It was a pretty intense scene, and she said she was having a little bit of anxiety, and I suggested that she just have some lemon balm tea, and she called me in a couple of days, And she said, we just gave the lemon balm tea to everyone, all the kids, my husband, and everybody's feeling much better. And they said they put a little splash of milk into it to make it a little bit lighter, and everybody was much happier that way. So then this plant is very well known and gentle as it comes, beautiful. I was at a conference once and the speaker said, well, I don't want to be trite, but chamomile tea. And I thought, what is trite about a plant that is beautiful and tastes good and is really effective and is super safe? I mean, it's a wonderful combination. So it's super gentle. You can use it with children. It's a great fever reducer for children, and you can make a strong brew and put it into their bath water. You can also just have them drink the tea. You can drink it hot or cold. You'll get more of the volatile oil breathing if you do it hot, but either way is good for sleep and also for digestion. So if it is steeped for a short time, it's quite sweet and light in color, like the middle cup at the bottom. And that's more of the sleep enhancing, calming, anti-anxiety plant. If you steep it for longer, it will turn to a deeper golden brown, and that brings out more of the bitter components in the tea, and so it supports digestion. So this is a great plant because if you're having anxiety and it gets you in the stomach, like butterflies in your stomach, it is a digestive aid as well as a nervine tonic. So it's a terrific plant for that. There is some mention of contraindication in people with severe ragweed allergies. This would not be the plant for them because they may well react to this as well as the ragweed. So I also put these three plants in this talk because they pair all three of them together very nicely. So how do we make a tea? How to brew tea? That is, again, very simple, and I frequently will give this option to people because there's just so little work that goes into it, and it's a little bit of a meditative process in and of itself. So the plant here at the top is lemon balm, and that is fresh. That is the aerial part of the plant. That means the stems, the leaves, the flowers, all the parts that grow above the ground. Those are pretty easy to just pour hot water on top of, and all of those constituents come out because these plants are very delicate. They don't have really big crunchy edges that need to be waterlogged and need to be broken up or ground or anything. So you can cut it up a little bit with scissors if you want to, or with a knife, but you can just put the whole plant in there. So one of the questions is, do you have to steep it or boil it? So steeping, basically an infusion, means that you pour hot water on top of the plant, you let it sit, and then you drink the tea after you've strained out the plant. When you have something like below the root there, those are pretty hard dried roots, berries, barks. Those may need to be decocted, which means that you put them in the water and you actually boil them in the water instead of using the water that you've already boiled to just pour on top. So like I say, these aerial parts are easy to steep, and the other ones you need to boil a little bit. So I have a great winter tonic that uses bark and roots and dried berries, and that's definitely something that you'll boil over 12 or 15 minutes usually is enough to get it going. So a single tea and water equals what's called a simple by herbalists. So you can have combination teas or you can have a simple. And again, I often will recommend to people that when they're starting out, they should just make a simple. Make a cup of chamomile tea, then make a cup of lemon balm tea. See how both of those taste, see what their effect is on you, see how you like them, and then put them together and try the combination. And then you can do the same thing where you have chamomile with a touch of lavender, or you can have lemon balm with a touch of lavender, or you can then try all three of them. But I encourage people to really get to know individual plants in their body, like how does chamomile make me feel? Does it make me feel different from lemon balm? And then do you see those two feelings combined when you take them? Does that dilute the feeling that you liked, or does it really increase it? Because a lot of plants are synergistic in their action. So if this one feels good and this one feels good, the two of them together feel great. So if they're synergistically working together because of their different components that they combine. So in general, when you're making tea, and I'm going to turn my camera onto a little tea making demonstration in a few minutes. So the rule of thumb on this is somewhere between 1 teaspoon to 1 tablespoon of the dried herb, and that to 1 cup of water, depending on how strong you want your brew, because some people really like a strong hit of tea, and some people want something that's very light and doesn't really challenge their taste buds all that much. I learned very early in my career as a naturopath when this one lady came in and she said, I will take anything you tell me to take as long as it doesn't taste bad. And so I have found that to be true, that people really have a better relationship with their medicine if they don't have to fight with how it tastes. Some of the Chinese herbal combinations are incredibly strong and really, really bitter, and they work, but it's tough to get through them. So I try to get people to have a friendly relationship with their herbal plants. So how long to steep them? I usually tell people always to steep covered for at least 10 minutes, and that's usually sufficient. The longer, the more of the bitter components you're going to be pulling out of the plant into the water. So some people are going for the bitter aspect because that's great for digestion, and some people, if it gets too bitter, they don't like it anymore. So green tea, for example, great, 2 to 3 minutes steep. If you start steeping it longer than that, you move from the sweet parts into the bitter, and that can be very bitter. So covered, because as I talked about before, those volatile oils, it's like when you're cutting an onion and all of those volatile oils come up and make you cry. It's the same sort of thing with the plants. Those volatile oils are getting into the air, and they're going through your sinuses and through your olfactory bulb there, and this is going directly into your limbic system. So one of the things that's really effective here is not just that you're drinking these, but that you're smelling them, you're breathing them. You can actually make a tent where you put a bowl of tea under you and put a towel over your head, and you can steam and breathe in all of those things. So people who really can't drink a tea could even do a steam. So the argument for drinking your tea hot is that you're not losing all of those, because it gets a little quieter when you cool them down. But I will say that an iced tea in the summer of the lemon balm and chamomile can be really delightful, and you're still getting a lot of the benefit out of those plants. So that direct impact on the nervous system is really wonderful, especially when we're talking about anxiety. So in the slide here, you can see this bottom picture with the herbs in the water in the mason jar. Mason jars are a fantastic thing to use because they're prolific, and you can make a little bit of tea or you can make a lot of tea. You can strain from one into the other when you're trying to get rid of the pieces of the herb that are floating around. And you'll see this one, the herbs are partially floating and partially they've sunk to the bottom. So often we'll put the herb in, it all floats, and then as it gets done steeping, the herbs will sink down to the bottom and make it a little easier to strain out through a mesh strainer. I will mention that using tea as ceremony is something that the Japanese know all about. They do the Japanese tea ceremony. It is actually a lengthy performance art. They compare it to the ballet, where somebody will study for years to do a really elegant and perfected tea ceremony. Even kids know that sitting and having a tea party is a joyful event. And so if you take that joy of sitting with the tea and enjoying the fragrance and the relaxation and even the beautiful cups and things, you can use mason jars if you like those. There are all kinds of beautiful tea things out there. And so if you can encourage people to take the time to sit and enjoy the beautiful, warm, fragrant, flavorful experience of tea, it's so different than taking a pill. You know, in this country, when we say medicine, we sort of automatically think pill. And if you talk to somebody in Mexico and you say medicine, they automatically think tea. And their teas tend not to be a little tiny tea bag with a little bit of flavor in it. They put, like in China, they put a lot more into the tea, and they drink a much stronger tea, and it's much more medicinal in that sense. So this I just put here because I think people kind of get a little bit worried about whether they're doing the tea right, and it's going to take a big chunk of time out of their day. You know, you can sit and have tea made in 10 minutes. It's very simple. And to be able to enjoy that time, set that time aside. In England, 2 o'clock is tea time. Everybody kind of stops their day, gets a little bit of a boost, and then goes back and finishes their day. And there's no problem with that. Here we take smoke breaks instead of tea breaks. We could change that. So I've got a couple of references here, and this is really some information about how safe these plants are. There's all kinds of beautiful herbal pharmacopoeia books available that you can check out, but these are the more sort of serious, if you want to know the technical aspects and the chemical parts of the plants that I didn't have time to really talk about in this talk. So, and then I'm going to flip over from this. I just wanted to show you, this is Nepeta cataria, our family antidepressant, and Nepeta cataria is Latin for catnip, which is actually another mint family plant that is fantastic for anxiety. So that's part of the way that she got named. So this is the herb garden and veggie garden that we have. It's about 100 feet around in the southern circle there. You can see the black dot is our fire circle, and that is the business logo that we created off of that garden that we've been working on for more than 10 years now.